What is up, and welcome to the Lakers Theory Podcast. Some might even call this the first official edition of the podcast. I know I said that the last time, but that was an intro podcast. And like I said last week, about 95% of that stuff should be relevant for years to come. So this is what I would call the first podcast of Lakers Theory, because we're actually going to talk about meaningful things that happen. I'm your host, Shane Jackson. Join with me is Austin Gase. Austin, is my assessment right? Is this the first podcast of Lakers Theory?
I would say so. This is really the first time we're really going to get into some content.
So I have to bring it up. You actually went back and listened to the first podcast, something that I do not do because I don't want to know how dumb I sound or all the dumb things I say. But you had an observation about yourself from listening to what is now the intro version of the Lakers Theory podcast. What did you come up with after listening to that hour-long podcast, by the way?
So I did notice that I like to say, and I guess you could say there's probably a drinking game in there for people who actually listen to us. I will try to cut down on that just for my own sake. I did watch it because I was curious. Just to kind of see how I sounded, which they say you shouldn't do anyway, because you're always going to hate how you sound, which is true. But yeah, I wanted to go back and just take a peek and just kind of see how we did.
Yeah, I used to do play-by-play back in the day, back in my college days, and I was told not to go back and listen because you'll just hate it. And after like the first time of doing that, I was like, yeah, this is the worst thing ever. I don't know why anybody would ever listen to me. What I will say though is we are going to get better at this. I mean,
Yes.
That whole thing about podcasting is to figure out how each other work, how we work with each other. I will say that my girlfriend listened to this podcast for like a couple minutes. I won't give her too much credit, but she had notes for me saying that I repeated myself a little bit. So you're not alone, and I will work on repeating myself as well moving forward. But again, I'm going to repeat myself from earlier, but we're going to grow together in this podcast, and you can stay tuned to the Lakers Theory podcast. We do have social media channels on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and I guess it's just called Lakers Theory. I was struggling with that last week when I was trying to say where you should follow us for your podcast feed, and it's just the name of the podcast. So Austin did not speak up when I kept struggling with that, and then instantly after the podcast was ended, he said, yeah, it's just Lakers Theory. So thank you for that, Austin. But
No
there
problem.
is a lot to talk about because an actual transaction happened. There is a new Los Angeles Laker on the team. It's Dennis Schroder, which we had to make sure we pronounced that name right, talking about play-by-play in that sense from what we were talking about earlier. But Dennis Schroder is going to be an LA Laker, came via trade officially late last night after the NBA draft. We are recording this on Thursday night, but it happened late Wednesday night is when I saw the tweet from the LA Lakers official team account. Schroder, a 27-year-old guard from Oklahoma City Thunder. We'll get into how he fits with the Lakers team, who had to go for that to happen. But initial impression of getting Dennis Schroder on your team, Austin. What did you think about the move?
I think it's exciting. He's young. He's AD's age. So I think there's potential there for him to stick around and be the point guard of the future. I think he provides some youth to the team. I think we're going to expect, a lot. I think he's going to come in and start. Otherwise you're not going to trade a starting piece for a guy to come off the bench, but maybe you do. But I see him as a starter. I think he's going to provide a lot of energy. You could kind of see that with OKC. And I think he's gonna be a good ball distributor. I'm excited. I didn't watch too much of OKC play, and so I don't, without going back and just really getting into his tape, I can't comment too much. But I think it's going to be exciting watching him play. He is young. He is very high energy from some of the replays that I've seen of him. I can see that energy, and it's gonna be fun.
Well, I got bad news for you. We are about 5 minutes on this podcast, and we're going to talk about him for a little bit here. I know you haven't watched a whole lot of him or anything like that, but we're going to still have our own initial impressions of what we think Dennis Schroder is going to do and how he fits on this team. Obviously, that's subject to change, as Austin said, because when he becomes a Laker, we'll get a better idea of him when we're watching him on a night-to-night basis. But yeah, this is basically us going back. I don't know about you, but all I did was go back and watch his highlight videos on YouTube and read articles from people who had covered him at his previous stops, I should say, plural, for the Hawks and the Thunder. And it was hard not to immediately think this is just a younger Rondo, which is the person he was compared to when he came out in the 2013 NBA draft. And if you watch those highlight videos, you can see a lot of Rondo mannerisms in his game. And so I think I was very excited personally because I think you saw how good this team is when playoff Rondo was in this lineup. I mean, that deep in that postseason, he was getting a lot of minutes, and just having another player outside of LeBron to be the ball handler, the play, make his own shots, get to the rim, stuff like that. Those are things that I noticed immediately when you're watching Dennis Schroder's highlight videos. And I'll show highlight videos on this broadcast here in a little bit as well. And you can get your own impressions on them as well. But that was, I would say, my first takeaway. And that's important because we kind of alluded to it already, but there's going to be a short offseason here. And AD and LeBron may not exactly want to go full out early on in the season. And so having a guy like Dennis Schroder who could theoretically create on his own, I think is going to be very important. I think it could alleviate some of the pressure off of LeBron in particular, but even AD to a certain extent. And we'll get into offensively and defensively specifically, but that was my initial takeaway. So let's do that. Let's talk about the offense first, because I think that is where fans should be most excited for. At least personally for me, I think that's how you can see maybe the reason why the Lakers made this move is more on the offense end. And so, Austin, let's start with you. What did you notice about the way he plays on the offensive side of the ball?
And so when looking up information about him, I actually went back. And so between 2016 and 2018, he was a starter. And so I just kind of wanted to see how that was for him, because that's how I envision him on this team as a starter. And so he shot 44% overall, 31.5% from three. But then, he also was getting 6 assists a game. And so that's good numbers if you think LeBron is going to be the assist leader on the team. And so I think that's what you're going to get from him. You're going to get a guy who can create his own shots. You're going to get a guy that can distribute the ball if LeBron's not in the game, or if LeBron just wants a break from handling the ball. And so I think it's going to be exciting offensively to watch him play.
Yeah, that was the first thing I noticed is he's quick, he's fast, he can get to the rim, and he can beat guys off the dribble. I liked how he could almost change his speed as well, like that kind of stop-start mentality as well. I thought he had a really nice mid-range, especially a pull-up shot. Someone, and now I don't remember who, but wrote about how he shot 48.1% from mid-range last year. And so I think, we'll get into his 3-point game in particular here in a little bit, but I think that is an underrated aspect to his game, because not only can he get to the rim, but it felt like he had an element to maybe pull up and play in the mid-range, which I don't necessarily think I saw a lot of with the Lakers. I mean, we have obviously mentioned their struggles in the half-court offense, and I think having someone like that could improve the half-court offense in particular. But yeah, the 3-point is obviously what everybody's kind of concerned about, especially if you're a Lakers fan. He shot 38%, I believe, from deep last year, which is kind of an outlier for him. And so there is reason to believe that, hey, maybe he won't shoot that as well, and maybe the Thunder were selling higher and all that. But he did have success on catch and shoot threes. And a part of that was by design in that Thunder offense. and he didn't have to do a whole lot in terms of maybe shooting off the dribble from long range. So I think that's an important thing because, if you're in an offense like the Lakers have with LeBron, you're going to get a lot more catch and shoot opportunities. So maybe the three ball is not as good as what we saw at times last year, but the catch and shoot 3-point percentage in particular is promising because I think you're going to get a lot more of that. And maybe he's not going to be as good as what Lakers fans thought Danny Green was going to be, obviously. But for me, I think that brings a little bit more level of optimism about his game in terms of his long range game. But the reason why you should be excited about him is the way and as you see in the highlight videos from Golden Hoops, the way he can just get to the rim. And he's aggressive. He plays with this kind of competitive mindset. And I just like the way he plays from based off even just these clips right here. But is that fair, Austin? Are you concerned at all maybe about his three ball?
Yes and no. I know you mentioned that he was a lot better off catch and shoot. And so maybe that's how they utilize his 3-point shot. LeBron's going to bring the ball down the floor a lot, and that's just part of his game now. And so that's going to open up that opportunity for him to spot up and shoot. And I think I remember seeing kind of they're bringing him in because they don't anticipate Rondo's going to stay. Mm-hmm. And so if that's the case, if you know that he is a catch and shoot three guy, or he's a lot better, he's going to draw that attention. Whereas Rondo, people didn't step out as much, weren't as willing to contest his 3-point shots, and you saw a lot of that during the playoffs. And so I think his game is going to complement what the Lakers were building towards a lot.
The thing that is concerning is the other side of the court. And that's where I want to get to next is the defense. What I am concerned about and what Lakers fans probably in general are concerned about is what the Lakers are losing by not having, with Danny Green going away in this trade. You lose some of your better wing defense because he was a really good help defender in particular. And you replace him theoretically in this scenario with Dennis Schroder, who leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of on that side of the floor. I do think maybe that might be a little bit overblown based off, smart people I've read have questioned this move. And, Kevin Pelton in particular over at ESPN graded this as a C for the Lakers. And he spoke to that as well. Or he mentioned why he was concerned. It was mostly defense. And I think part of that concern might be overblown because we've talked about his physical tools when on the offensive end. There's reason to believe that, hey, he can bring that defensively as well. I mean, he's fast, and that is an asset you can have on that side of the floor. So he's not going to be as physical out on the perimeter. But maybe if you're guarding a point guard or a certain matchup, you may not have to rely on that as much. And I think just in general, just the way if you watch him play, he's kind of got that fiery attitude that I think that could translate to the defensive side of the floor. And one of the things that was really fascinating to me to watch the Lakers this past year was that everybody seemed to buy in on that end. And we even talked about how Kyle Kuzma showed great strides down the stretch on the defensive side. I thought everybody bought in, and that was the key to the Lakers winning a title. And so even if Dennis Schroder maybe has limitations on that side of the floor, why not give him the benefit of the doubt and say, hey, we've seen other players buy in. Maybe he's going to buy in this situation. Do you agree, Austin?
Kind of. So outside of his offensive abilities, something that stuck out to me when I was, getting past information on him. Last year, for guards who averaged at least 28 minutes and played at least 45 games, he had the best defensive rating. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how they decide their defensive rating point system, but it was 103. And so when I saw that, for me, that was like, that's why he's on this team now. Danny Green, I thought was a phenomenal defensive player. And so at first I was like, you're losing a good defensive guy. And then, but once I saw that, I said, okay, they see this guy has great potential on the defensive side of the ball. And so that's probably why they were comfortable with sending Danny Green to OKC. And so I think that's probably one of the key reasons why he's on this team now, is because of his defensive abilities from last year, but also what they can do with those abilities. Because I think he's going to be able to improve with this Lakers team.
That's the thing. So this team had an identity by being good defensively. As soon as you make a move like this after winning a title, there's a fear of, hey, maybe we rocked the boat by this. Maybe we lost some of our identity. And we're going to get into the free agents at the end of this podcast, but there might be losing more of the identity that way, right? But I think it's important not to look at this as a one-for-one type of move. This is the Lakers saw a need to get someone who could help out on the offensive end by taking the ball out of LeBron's hands if needed. They saw a guy who could create his own shot, who could get to the rim and create something in a half-court offense for a team that lacked it, for a better term, for this past year. And so, yes, there's a fear that this team's going to rock the boat, lose their identity. But I also think you should applaud the Lakers for saying, hey, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to figure out how we can theoretically win another title. And that's all that matters. So, Austin, is there a concern about Dennis Schroder in general? Do you have a concern at all about how he fits with this team?
I don't. They're going to have to get in a rhythm together, and this is a bad offseason to do that, and so it's going to take a little bit of time. But I think once they've played together, once they kind of figure out how Schroder likes to play, I think you'll see that just in the games, and I don't have any concern. I think he's a more athletic than Danny Green was, and so I think there's reason for optimism. I'm excited. I look forward to it. I look forward to watching him play. I think he's going to bring good energy, just high level energy that's going to be really appreciated.
I think there's a chance he hasn't even stepped on the floor yet. And I think there's a chance he's already my fourth favorite Laker behind LeBron, AD, and Caruso. So I'm very excited. I will say, because I feel like it needs to be said in podcast form now before maybe what happens this season. I think there's some level of concern there of how he fits. It's worth noting that, hey, he's going to make $15 million this year, and he's probably going to be the third highest paid player on the team. Is he going to be okay with whatever role he's given? I mean, there is reason to believe, and we talked about it in the first real edition of this podcast, that there was always, maybe in the big three element, a disgruntled third star. I mean, he's not necessarily the big three here, but he could be disgruntled having a kind of minor role or smaller role than he anticipated. Maybe he's not in the closing lineup as often as he thinks he should be because the Lakers, depending on matchups, want to go with a different group out there. And Dennis Schroder is the one left on the bench because they're concerned about the way he guards someone out there. I think there is going to be ways that this could backfire, but there's enough positives there to see why the Lakers made the move. I mean, if for nothing else, if he is theoretically the younger version of Rondo, that's a good thing. Like Rondo, the thing about Rondo was he was so effective in this team, but he showed up in the playoffs or every 5-6 games in the regular season. You're going to get more consistency if it's a younger version of him at 27, maybe in a contract year, maybe wants to form a future here with AD and the Lakers. So I think there are enough positives here to get excited about this move. But I thought it was worth mentioning that it's not a slam dunk by any means. And there are smart people out there who think that Lakers maybe made a mistake. I just think when we look at this offseason as a whole, we need to look at it as a whole and not a Danny Green swap for Dennis Schroder, because that's probably not fair, mostly because they don't play at the same position. So let's get into that aspect of the trade, though. Danny Green is gone. And so is the first-round pick, which we'll mention here in a little bit. But how are you going to remember Danny Green's time as a Laker, and how sad were you to see him go?
I was sad. I really like Danny Green. He became a little inconsistent there in the playoffs. But he wasn't this super all-star player, and so guys are going to be inconsistent sometimes, and it was just a bad time to be inconsistent. But I really like Danny Green. I remember last offseason, he was one of the guys that I said, the Lakers need to go get this guy. And then the year before that, when he went to Toronto, that was also a year that I said, I think the Lakers need to go get this guy. So he was a guy that I liked. So I am sad to see him go, but he's leaving a champion, and for that I am grateful for how he helped the team.
Yeah, flags fly forever, right? Championships last forever. Yes, it is. Danny Green was some sort of punching bag for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only Lakers fan who thought that this past year. This is kind of the downside of being a 3-and-D player like Danny Green, though. I mean, if the threes aren't falling, like, that's what you're supposed to do. You become the punching bag, and it just felt like, he had one of more his inefficient years in recent memory. So, and it happened to be with the Lakers, and yes, there were reasons to like Danny Green. Obviously, he still brought it on the defensive end, as we've mentioned already multiple times. But it always felt like, hey, why are you not hitting the wide open shot? But I also think, and I've mentioned this to you, I think almost every basketball fan needs a player like that, like a punching bag on the team after a loss, because you want to blame it all on that player, even though it's not all on that player. But it humanizes the result a little bit, I think. And I still liked Danny Green as a person, though. We went on a Lakers road trip to the OKC Thunder and Memphis Grizzlies back-to-back road games, and Danny Green was the first one out there on warm-ups every time that we went. We made note of that. I thought that, for me, that stood out. I mean, these guys play in that particular instance, they played back-to-back nights, but they play a bunch of nights, and he's constantly the first one out there. It shows his kind of commitment to the game, and as someone who's had as much success as he's had and played as much as he's had, especially the last couple playoff runs, deep title runs, I found that impressive. And honestly, I already forgot who he ended up with at this point, because there were so many trades that happened last night. But I am going to miss Danny Green, if for nothing else than to roast him after a Lakers loss. But there is a chance that the Lakers sold low on Danny Green, right? I mean, I know Kevin Pelton, as I mentioned earlier on ESPN, wrote this in his article. He said, hey, he didn't shoot as well as people thought, and there's a chance the Lakers sold low because he fell to the bottom of their pecking order on their wing perimeter options. And that could be concerning. I mean, if he has a better year this next year and you're like, hey, they could have gotten more out of Danny Green. But obviously, I wish him the best of luck, and I will miss him. Will you miss let me make sure I get the name right. Jade McDaniels? What was your favorite part? Oh, Jade McDaniels, sorry. What was your favorite part of the Jaden McDaniels era as a Los Angeles Laker?
You know what? If he's a superstar one day, maybe the Lakers are like, we made a mistake. But I trust Pelinka knows what he's doing. And so there's something in Schroeder that he thought was worth Danny Green in that pick. And so I don't think that pick will be missed, but we'll never know. And so it's just, you look forward and see what happens.
For those that don't know, he was drafted, Jade McDaniels, a forward from Washington, was drafted with a 28th overall pick. And he was supposed to go to the Thunder, but they made a trade. And so he's ended up with the Timberwolves. But he wore a Lakers hat because that's the way the NBA draft works. And he was a Laker for a brief moment, really a Laker for life, if you ask me. And that's how I remember him as a Laker for life. Really one of my favorite Lakers to ever put on the hat. No, I just wanted to mention that because the Lakers did have to give up a pick, one of their few picks for a while, I believe. I don't remember exactly the draft capital situation, but I know they gave up a shitload of picks to get Anthony Davis, which obviously worked out with just one title already. But I wanted to get this into a discussion about the NBA draft because we are recording this the day after the NBA draft took place. The Lakers obviously didn't pick anybody. And they didn't buy a second round pick, which I know there was some conversation about that. And it made the NBA draft relatively boring for us Lakers fans. I know I was just sitting there doing nothing and thinking that the Lakers might buy a pick. And is this just the price you pay when you're the NBA champion and you don't really need rookies? Or what happened there? What was it like watching the NBA draft last night?
It was boring. That plain and simple. It was boring. Not knowing a lot about the draft class in general made it hard to follow. But also, the Lakers didn't have a pick, and so it was I didn't have that much interest in what was going on. I know I kind of mentioned to you that I wanted the Lakers to kind of come up and take a couple guys that I thought could help them. But they didn't. I think they didn't make any moves for cap reasons. Yeah. And so that's just what I think. I have no idea.
And the Rockets set the market, I believe, right? They paid for a second rounder last night that was like $4-something million or whatever. And at that point, that set the price for the second rounder, and the Lakers we're not spending that money.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, the Lakers are pretty strapped for cap.
Yeah,
and so they're not going to pay $4 million for a guy who might make the team.
I agree with you. The draft was hard to follow. I do not pretend to be an NBA draft expert, although I do know a lot of names from just college basketball, covering college basketball. But even I was learning a bunch of names last night. And I thought not only was it hard to follow because it's hard to not when you don't know the class. It was a down class. So that's the reason why there wasn't a lot of excitement about last night, as much excitement, I should say, about last night. Not only was that hard to follow, but it's just hard to follow who is on whose team. And this is a complaint I have every year. But as I just mentioned earlier, is that they have to still wear the hat that the team was drafted by, even though they know they're going to play for another team. And in McDaniels' case, he was getting traded to the Thunder, who traded him to the Timberwolves. And it was just, that happened all night. It was incredible how much I felt like it was worse than it's ever been, at least in the last handful of years that I've been watching the draft. And that creates a whole nother element of confusion for any casual person watching, or like me, who was just drinking a glass of beer or whatever. And I was like, I don't know who's on whose team. I still don't really know, even though I just read a couple articles today trying to figure out what happened, who won and who lost the draft. But were you confused? I know you don't really follow college basketball that closely. I imagine it was even worse.
Yeah, I finally realized that they were showing, the trades. Mm-hmm. It was just proposed trades.
Yeah.
And so, but I found it hard to follow. But we're not going to really know until, a few more days, until these transactions can be official. So I think once the dust settles, then we can be like, oh, okay, this guy was drafted by this team, but then traded twice.
One last complaint I had about the NBA draft, and I don't think I'm alone, but I think I'm alone in this broadcast studio about this. Enough with the sob stories about these prospects. It is like their best moment of their life, and they're asking them about what family member died and how that motivated them. And I think, and I'm a journalist, and so I think there's room for that story to be told. I don't think it's being accurately told in the best way in a 2-minute interview with this person right after they were drafted and accomplishing their lifelong dreams. I think that's insane. I think the reason why these athletes can tell that story and why maybe it motivates them to have their basketball career and all that is because they form a relationship with the journalist and they trust the journalist to tell that story. But this is just I mean, they're just asking them to, some person they don't really know that well. And it's on national TV. It's on live TV. And it's a interview that lasts a minute and a half or whatever, right after they found out that they made it to the NBA, which is something they've probably been working for their entire life. I don't know. You mentioned before we went on air that you thought it was good. I agree that watching these athletes get emotional when they figure out that they made it to the NBA was great, but that was the only part that was interesting to me. I thought the sob stories was out of control.
Yeah, to an extent, yes. I don't think every single player needs a sob story, but that story could be their motivation. Why they work so hard, why they put in all the time, and so that's understandable that they would want that to be shown on live TV. But it kind of. It's just hard. It's hard.
Any final draft thoughts from you about last night? It being weird that it was remote. Anything like that?
No, I didn't find it weird. I kind of like it. You don't get that. You don't get the interaction that you would normally get. But it's not bad. I think things move a lot quicker, which I guess that's a good thing. If it's really boring like it was for us and you don't have a pick to look forward to, then let's get this over with quick. But I kind of enjoyed the remote drafts and stuff like that.
Remote was good for me because I cover KU basketball, and Bill Self was obviously going to talk about after the Jayhawks were drafted in the NBA. He was waiting until the second player was drafted. The second player was never drafted, so we just did it after the draft. He did a press conference with local reporters, and instead of being in the media room or driving across town to go there, it was just him on his cell phone in this Zoom conference. And at one point he froze out and had to jump back on. So it was really unique to do it that way. And I thought that was interesting. Udoka Azubuike was drafted in the first round from Kansas. And then Devon Dotson went undrafted but signed with the Bulls, and we found out that news while talking to Self after the draft. So the remote aspect helped me because I got to just watch that press conference from my house in my PJs with my Lakers shirt on and a beer in hand, and I didn't care. It was that part was interesting at least. And the NBA draft is fun. Obviously, it's these players really accomplishing what they've been working all their lives for. And I think at any level, that's interesting. That's why the draft is always interesting to me in any sport, because you're projecting these players, what they're going to do at the next level. And you can talk about all their skill sets and all that stuff and how they'll translate and all that. But at the end of the day, they are humans, and you can see that raw emotion when they get drafted. And I do think that's cool. I just think the sob stories are out of control. And that started the NFL draft. So I will stay on that take. You can be on the wrong side of history for that. But let's get into the free agency. We probably won't stick on this conversation too long, but we'll close out the podcast with just free agency talk. I think free agency officially begins Friday afternoon. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Okay. So by the time this thing is posted, free agency will basically have started or is starting close, depending on when you are listening to it. So the reason why I don't want to talk too much about it is because there's a lot we don't know at this moment, obviously, because we're recording on Thursday night, and there's a lot that could change by the time you are listening to this, maybe over the weekend. But we will record another one as more free agency stuff comes through. Even if it is only once a week, maybe it is a Thursday night thing that the show pops up Friday. I don't know. We'll figure out a schedule completely. But Austin, this is your forte. You mentioned on the intro podcast that, hey, this is the thing you get nerdy about. This is the thing you really enjoy. So you're going to have to carry the team down the stretch here on the podcast because we're going to talk about all the contracts and stuff like that. But let's start with the Anthony Davis. How about that? He's kind of a big deal. I don't know if you know that. But Austin, Anthony Davis, obviously, it was the technical term opted out.
Yes.
And that was expected.
Yeah.
But he is theoretically the first domino to fall for the Lakers. What do you expect Anthony Davis to do? Because I think it's a matter of just if he's doing a 2-1 or 1-1. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so he can sign a 5-year. Like the Lakers can offer him a 5-year supermax deal. The thing is, he's going to be leaving a lot of money on the table, and so the thing that I think is I think we're going to get AD signing news pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
I think this deal is ready to go. We just can't know about it yet. Okay. And so I personally think it's going to be a 1-and-1. 1 year, and he's going to have a player option because that's what LeBron has left.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to find that news pretty quick. And so, but yeah, that's going to be the first domino. Once we get AD news, I think we're going to see the Lakers move pretty quick. And I know I saw Plinka said that the Lakers are going to be aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the article I just got reading before this podcast from Kyle Goon of the Register, I believe, was his newspaper. And yeah, I think, as you mentioned, AD is probably the first domino. Like, this is who they have to figure out first, and then they can fill out the roster that way, and you have determining based off what he signs with, right, is how you view maybe your immediate future. So if he does go 1-and-1, is that something that we should be on board with? Is that the right move in that situation, or do you not have a preference?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be worried. If we get one more year of LeBron and AD and they can build another championship team, or we win another championship and that's it, you're excited. You want AD to be there for, the next 10 years.
Yeah.
But, you're not going to you can't expect him just to stay a Laker forever. But that's what you want.
For the purposes of this podcast, I hope he's here for 10 more years because I don't know how interested I will be to discuss the Lakers if Anthony Davis is not on this team because I know LeBron is not going to be superhuman forever, so I will have to default to rooting for Anthony Davis. But if they go back to maybe another bad year, I may not be as interested to record a podcast with you once a week. I'm just saying that in advance. But no, let's get into the rest of the team, because there are a lot of potential opt-in, opt-out stuff that's happening theoretically, reportedly, I should say, today. But it's not all official until tomorrow, I believe, is my understanding. Austin, take me through the rest of the roster. Who's opting in, who's opting out, or what you expect them to do going into tomorrow.
So JaVale has opted in. And so he's going to get $4.2 million, and so that's his deal. Bradley, Rondo, and KCP, they all opted out. The belief is Rondo's going to leave, which is why they brought Schrder in. So KCP, I think KCP sticks around. The Lakers can offer him more money than what people are saying he can get elsewhere. And the Lakers can offer him that money and still have room to make other moves. And so I think that's something to keep an eye on. I want KCP back. I've been a KCP fan. I will remember when we went on our road trip with the team, some kid was dogging him. And I just remember we looked at each other and was just, get out of here. You don't know nothing. You're a kid.
That's the day Austin went to jail because he fought a kid.
So I look forward to that. I think KCP could be the second guy to come back. But I don't know about Bradley. I want him back. We didn't really get to see what he would be like in the playoffs. And I know they missed that aspect of him. And so I know they can offer him a little bit more money than what he's making now, which is why he opted out. And so I remember seeing an article where the guy was saying, if your market value is only it is right around the same as much as what you can make if you opt into a contract. Why do that? Check your options. And so, but I do want Bradley back. I think he would provide a good mentor for Schroeder.
Yeah.
And so, the other guys, Markieff Morris and Dwight Howard. I know I saw a story that Pelinka is getting in contact with Howard like
Calling him
3 times a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that should speak volume. I don't know what Dwight's going to ask for. I saw something. He said he doesn't want to play for free anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But, he's worth it. I think whatever he wants he's worth it. Whether the Lakers can do it realistically and still be able to build the roster that they want to, that's another story. But I would like to see Dwight back. I remember in 2012 when he came, I was so against that. I did not think it was going to work, and it didn't. But I think it's a different story now with Howard. And so I think he fits in good with this team. So we'll see there. And, I know I touched on Markieff in our intro pod. And so I think that's why you want to try to bring him back, is because he's going to provide, that's what you're going to get from him. Know, if you need him to step in and start in a small lineup, he can provide that for you. And so I think that's a key piece that you would want. What do you got?
So based on what you were saying, I believe your official prediction is McGee is coming back, right?
Yes, he opted in, so he is on the roster.
You believe KCP is coming back. You don't believe Rondo is coming back.
Yes.
You're an I don't know on Bradley.
Yes.
Do you believe Dwight Howard is coming back?
So I guess he wants to stay.
Mm-hmm. I'm asking your prediction, Austin. You stare into the crystal ball. Do you think Dwight Howard is coming back?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't think so.
What about Markieff Morris?
I think there's a way that they can get him back. Okay. And so, yes, I think they can keep him.
All right. I just wanted to get you on the record saying that. So, from my understanding, based off what you were saying, KCP is your number one concern outside of Anthony Davis, obviously, right? You want KCP the most coming back, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's just me. That's just
Yeah. So if you were running the team, KCP is the first guy you were talking to basically after AD in this post-AD world.
Yes.
Okay. And then probably Dwight Howard?
Yeah, and I think just to kind of relay what I guess is going on with Pelinka, like he wants Howard back, and so I think I would continuously check out what's this going to take? What do we got to do?
Yeah, no, I agree, and I want KCP back as well. He's definitely number one on my goal list here coming back. I would like Dwight Howard and Markieff to come back as well. I don't want to go overboard with saying bring everybody back, because you have to figure out ways to improve this team. Obviously, Avery Bradley. I could see a world where he comes back, and I would want him to back. But at some point, you have to figure out, hey, we want to fix our roster this way, or we want to make our roster look like this next year, because you can't just say, hey, what we did last year is going to work. Because that's not how the NBA works. That's not how any league works. So there are ways that this team can improve, even though they did win a title. And so I am fascinated to see what Rob Pelinka does this offseason and doing that. I just wanted to get your opinion, if you were running this team on 2K, what you would do, and see if it matches with what Pelinka does, because we can say a month from now when it happens that you were the smartest person alive. So let's get into potential free agents that could come to the team. I'm assuming you're done with the players who are currently on the team, all right?
Yeah. Yeah, we can move on.
Your wish list, and I just wanted to get a few names from you on who you would like to come be a member of the Lakers that's a potential free agent this year. Obviously, I believe did I ask you this before the Schroder news came or not? I don't remember.
I can't. I don't think so. I don't remember though.
But so that may change how you view the team or whatever, because you didn't know Schroder was going to be a Laker as well. But Austin, give me a few names that you are on your wish list for the Lakers to at least feel around this offseason.
So one name that I look at is Wesley Matthews.
Yeah.
And I think he's on, a lot of the Lakers fear. He's a poor man's Danny Green.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a guy that I would keep an eye on to come in. There, and I don't know. Robin Lopez is a guy that I personally would keep an eye on. I haven't seen anything linking him to the Lakers at all, but it was a name that I saw that opted out.
Yeah.
And so I thought, there's a big that could come. I know there's been chatter about Boogie Cousins coming back. And so that's an interesting name if you don't get Dwight Howard.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something I saw. You don't want to have three centers on your team. And so, if you don't get Dwight Howard back, then that's probably a name to keep an eye on. And then also I've heard that JaVale could be on the move. Maybe you bring Dwight back, since Dwight was actually more involved, the deeper they got into the playoffs. And so that would be something to keep an eye on. Maybe they bring Dwight back and then Cousins comes in. And so, JaVale could be on the move if that's the case. Another name that I like would be Rodney Hood. I think he's a perimeter guy, and so that's something that they could use. And so those are just kind of some guys that came to mind as I was looking through all this information of guys opting out and stuff. And so those are just some guys that I wouldn't mind having. And we'll just kind of have to see what happens.
Yeah, Wes Matthews gets linked to the Lakers a lot in terms of players I've read about and rumored towards the Lakers. So that one is obviously going to be interesting to watch as well. Hadn't heard, obviously the Lopez or the Hood one. So interesting that you brought that up, just because if they do that, you are, again, the smartest person that should be running the Lakers, is what I'm going to say anyways. We'll wrap this up with some of the rest of the NBA free agency talk that's already happened. Has there been anything that's happened that has caught your eye so far, and what has been a wild week? I honestly, this happens every year with the NBA, every offseason, but it feels even crazier this year just because it's in November and not the summer when nothing else is going on. And so it's hard to keep track of everything that's happened. But Austin, anything stick out to you that's happened in this past few days?
Nothing particularly.
Yeah.
But yeah, you kind of mentioned, everything has to happen so quickly. And so it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to keep up with everything. But I don't think there's been anything definite that's happened that caught my eye, but the news of James Harden potentially going to the Nets, that's something that to keep an eye on. I don't see it happening. I don't think it's going to work out. But that was just something that was probably the biggest thing that I saw that could happen.
Feels like that is probably not going to happen, right? Like, it doesn't seem possible that the Rockets would sell that cheap based off what the reported offer or whatever, a theoretical offer that would have been out there. But it feels like maybe that probably wouldn't happen. And that he's probably going to start as a Rocket, and maybe it's more of a trade deadline type of thing. But I will say the whole Nets landing spot fascinates the hell out of me. I don't know if it would be the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever, but I would want to watch every second of it. And I think there is a reason to believe, hey, these three may want to win it together. KD, maybe he feels like nobody still respects him because he joined the Warriors and won his titles, or Kyrie Irving was on LeBron's team or whatever it was, and obviously James Harden hasn't won a title. So I think just having that kind of motivation with those three would be fascinating to see if they would maybe put it aside and say, hey, let's go win a ring, and then eventually lose the Lakers, by the way, in the finals. But that would be interesting to see. Or it would just be, they get in a fight in the middle of February and they have to blow this whole thing up. And that would just be as equally as interesting to me.
Yes.
So I do think that would be cool to see. I did like the Bucks trading for Drew Holiday. I believe there was a lot of like immediate, well, if Giannis stays, this was a good trade. If he doesn't, it was a bad trade. And for me, it was just like, hey, this is saying, yo, you are a player, Giannis, you are a player that we care about. We're going to build this team around you and give you the best shot at winning a title. And so screw hindsight analysis. I think it was the right move in the moment. Mm-hmm. And so I respect the hell out of the Bucks for doing that. Who knows if Giannis ends up staying because of the move or not, but at least they're going for it. I mean, that's what you have to do when you're the Milwaukee Bucks and you have a talent like Giannis. You can't just say, hey, we're content with just rolling it out with you again, even though it didn't work. So I respect them for going for it. I know Giannis is still a dream situation for you to land with the Lakers, but
I was about to comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's he can be a free agent next summer. And so as a Lakers fan, that's something I want to watch closely. I have no idea how it could work. But if it can work, I think Pelinka is thinking about it already.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so that was, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that I like, if LeBron for some reason doesn't come back to the Lakers, but they're able to pair Giannis and AD for 10 years, awesome. And then you also have, Schrder giving them the ball. There's a lot of possibilities next summer.
This is what Austin does every summer, talking to himself, and he's been doing that for a while, saying if you just pair this player with this player, superstar, we're going to be really good. The last thing I wanted to mention was Klay Thompson suffering a season-ending injury, and that was a tough one. Obviously, it's a big deal just for a Lakers podcast because the Warriors would have definitely given the Lakers a run for their money this year. I mean, it remains to be seen if they can do that without him, but it seems like it's going to be very tough to do. And as a person who, has rooted against the Warriors for so many years now, this one stung, though, because I love Klay Thompson. I think Klay Thompson might be my favorite non-favorite team player. He's easy to root for. You can tell by the NBA reaction to the news how everybody loves him. And I think that's just so unique for a team that was maybe hated as much as the Warriors were during their run. It was unique to see someone like Klay Thompson just as beloved as he was. And so I don't know. It was tough to see that news, and that really does sting. I don't know if you have an opinion on it.
Yeah, no, that is really sad because that was the talk. The Lakers, Clippers, the Warriors. Denver, there was going to be this race for the finals out of the West, and so it is sad. And I kind of lost my train of thought.
No, you're fine. It's tough.
It's really it
tough.
is. And so I remember seeing, early, maybe last night.
Yeah, it was last night when it started. Yeah. LeBron tweeted about it.
All the chatter, about him, and I couldn't find anything about it other than people were, mentioning it. And then when I saw the news today, I'm like, dang, that sucks. That's 2 years in a row you're not going to get to play basketball.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have any final thoughts from free agency? Anything Lakers related that you want to get into? Maybe one. Did you keep track of how many times you said I don't know. Any final thoughts from you, Austin?
I don't. I'm excited. It gets to kick off tomorrow, so it's going to be interesting.
I don't know if it's obvious, but I'm not excited. I just don't care about the discussion. I am ready for games. We're about a month away from games starting, though. So that's when I will get really excited, is when we can start talking about basketball games and you can start cutting players after a bad game. That's when I'm really excited. But we will continue having podcasts, even though the offseason is a dull for me. But Austin will keep us in line throughout the offseason with constant contract updates. I feel like we're going to do this once a week at least. If any breaking news happens, maybe we just jump on the pod and do it real quick and just cover the breaking news. Otherwise, we'll just do maybe a weekly recap. And once a week, we discuss the Lakers until they start playing basketball. And we'll start rattling off season preview stuff because that'll come up here in a couple weeks as well. I mean, it's fastly approaching. And I'm actually very excited, even though I think it's way too quick of a turnaround. Because it was not long ago the Lakers were the champions and we were popping champagne. So for Austin Case, I'm Shane Jackson. Thank you for listening to a Lakers Theory podcast. Follow us on social media everywhere on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Lakers Theory. Thank you for listening and see you next time.